The next step for the windshield is to give it the curve for the edges here. And as the drawing says, it's a round R0.5 typical on exterior surface unless noted otherwise. So both of these edges are going to be rounded point, point 0.5. So we'll click the fillet. And notice when we highlight this, it picks the entire edge all the way around. That's because we set up a tangent constraint here. So we can click on this side, click on that side. We can preview it if we want to see what it's going to look like. We're going to put in 0.5 for our, zero point 0.5 for our radius, hit enter, and we've got that nice curve going on. But if we take a look at the bottom of it, it's not hollow like the windshield should be. You can see here we can kind of see through the windshield. We can see in the section view that it's cut out. And we can see here there's a 0.07 between these two edges. So that's the thickness of the plastic all the way through the outside of the windshield. So we'll pick the shell command. And the first thing you want to do is tell it which part is going to be removed when you shell this. So we'll click on the bottom, and then you can see if we drag in, we can see what it would look like with different thicknesses of the plastic. The one that we need is going to be 0.07. That'll give us the correct thickness, and we can hit OK. And now the part looks like it's hollow on the inside. So that looks pretty good. The next thing to do is to give it this part right here that sticks inside the windshield. And for that one, we want to use this drawing and basically set up a rectangle and dimension everything the same way that that it's set up in this drawing. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and then I'm going to start measuring the different distances for the outside of this. And so the first distance, let's see, the rectangle. Um, let's make a sketch on the bottom. Draw my rectangle. The first distance, it says, is 0.675 from the front to the outside of the rectangle. Point 675. The outside of the rectangle is 2.215. And then vertically 0.290 from the bottom to the rectangle, 0.290. And then from the bottom to the top is 2.26. And now I have my rectangle. And then I remember from the car that the radius on the inside here is 0.2, so I'm going to use that for my fillets. 0.2. And I have that nice curve. The next tool I'm going to use is offset here, and offset lets me draw, copy something on the inside or outside of another curve, keeping all the same distances. So if we go over into the detail section here for detail B, we can see the wall thickness for this part that sticks down is 0.05. So I'll hit offset, click on the curve here, and you can see if you drag up or drag down that it's going to keep the entire thing the same distance. In this case, we want 0.05. Now, if you end up with the outside instead of the inside, you can use flip to go to the outside or the inside, but we want to use the inside, so hit OK. And if we stop the sketch, we can do our extrusion. If you click in the middle between the two curves, you can see that we're getting that that plastic ring, rounded rectangle that sticks down. Now for this one, we actually, because we're sketching on the bottom surface and we want this to go both directions. We'd like it to go from this surface up till it runs into the part. We'd also like it to go down in this direction. So we could do that in two separate extrusions, or we could choose the direction to be two sides. This first, this direction is supposed to be 0.67. And then the other direction, though, is going to be different depending on where it bumps into this. If we come up a little bit, we'd bump into it, but we would not make it all the way up over here. So what we want to do for that one, instead of giving it a distance, is clicking to object, and then we want to click on the surface of the part that we want it to run into, and make sure it's a join operation, and then when we say OK, it extrudes that surface up until it bumps into the surfaces behind it. At this point is perhaps to change the material so you can see through it if you think that might be helpful. So we could right click on our body and change the physical material to something that looks a little bit different. So we could choose a glass or perhaps a acrylic see-through plastic. So notice there's a number of different materials in here that you could pick. And if you apply that to the part, you can see through the part and see what that plastic would look like. So if you find that helpful, go ahead and do that at this point. I've done quite a bit here, so I'm going to save and then be ready to continue. So there's one step that's left, and that last step is going to be to add these ribs that are detailed in detail B so that we can have the windshield go into the wood body and not fall out. So those are basically interference ribs that are going to go into it. If you notice on the drawing, there's this line up and down. It's long, short, long. That means it's a center line. So they're giving us dimensions for the center of these ribs. And the width of the ribs are all going to be 0.050, and they're all going to stick out from the back side of the part, 0.094, or from the front side of the part, 0.044. So I'm going to start that out with rotating around to the bottom. And there's a couple different ways we could do this. We could make a new sketch on the outside of this and extrude them all the way, or we actually could go back in and modify that sketch we were working on before. I think I'm going to do it that way today. So we're going to double click on the sketch, and we're going to go in and modify this sketch to add those ribs, and then once we've done that, we'll modify the extrusion to add the rectangles. So I'm going to make the one in the middle here first, and I'm just going to make a random size rectangle and dimension from the one side to the other is 0.094 inches, and then the thickness of that is 0.05, but this can still move up and down. So we want to set it so that the center of this rib is the correct distance from the edge of the part. We notice that this, the dimensioning for this is a long, short, long line, which means it's a center line. So they're telling us where the center of the rib, that the center of the rib is 1.275 inches from the side. So what we're going to do this time is hit dimension. We'll click on the edge, but instead of clicking on this line or clicking on this one, we want to pick up the middle of this line. And the way you do that is you hold shift, and when you see the X with the triangle next to it, that's the symbol for the midpoint. So we can click right there and notice if we pull across the part, we're dimensioning to the middle between those two lines. So we can put that down, make that 1.275, and we have the rib in the correct spot. Everything turns black because it's fully constrained. So now we'll put the rectangle on the opposite side and do the same thing. Now I want to be careful not to click on it while I have the center point because that will lock the edge of the rib to the center of the line. I want to make sure that I'm just putting it in a random place, and I'm going to give it the thickness 0.095. Sorry, give it the thickness 0.094. And I could do the same thing and dimension these, the thickness and the distance from the center, or we could also just set this to be collinear on both sides. So I can, under constraints, I could choose collinear and tell it that the distance from here to here, that those should be lined up, and same thing on the other side of the rib, that those are lined up collinear, part of the same line, and that will lock everything in the right location. Then I can do the same thing, do 4 more ribs. So I'll do 2 on the top. And this time I'm going to do a couple other things to take advantage of what I've done before. I'm going to do dimension and dimension from one place to another on the rib. And then I'm going to click on, instead of typing in a distance, I'm going to click on this dimension over here and make this one dependent on this rib. So they'll be exactly the same all the time. And then I'm going to choose collinear to make the two ribs both stick out the same distance. I'll do the width of the rib. That's supposed to be 0.05, but instead of typing 0.05, I'm going to click on this other dimension, and that will make it so that it's always the exact same. And if I later choose to change how thick one rib is, all the ribs will change to be that new thickness. So then the last thing I need to do is dimension from the front, hold down shift so I can get the middle of this line and put that down, and that dimension should be 0.95. And then from the front of the part, I'll zoom in to the center of this rib. That didn't choose it, so I'm going to hit escape a couple times to get out of that command. Go back in and try it again. There we go. And that one should be 1.94. So the ribs on the top are set up correctly. And now I'll do the ribs on the bottom of the part. Give it the thickness. Make that the same as the other ribs, dimension 24. And then I'm going to set up the rest of these things to be collinear. So those have the correct thickness. This line to the one above it. This line is collinear with the one below it. And then this line is collinear with this edge and this edge of the rib. is collinear with this one. So now all my ribs are the correct thickness, the correct distance from the front of the part, and I'm ready to create the ribs on the actual part. So if you notice, again, it doesn't modify because it's just keeping the same profile we had before. So now we need to add those ribs to the extrusion. So to add those ribs to the extrusion, I'm going to double click on the extrusion. And notice it says I have one profile selected, but I want to add the rest of these rectangles into that profile. So this is highlighted. If I zoom in on these different rectangles, I click on it and you can see that it's adding that to the preview. I'll go around and carefully click on each rectangle one at a time. And if I click OK, now we can see that the part has all 6 ribs. All the extrusions are connected. Everything is shelled the correct. And we can rotate it this way. If you've changed the appearance to be see-through, you can do your screenshot like this. Otherwise, choose one of the other isometric views where we can see that it's shelled from the bottom side. And this part is ready to use.